Hey everybody, Tony Lale here again with Grant Ekstrom from Succurri. He's the managing partner. Hey, how you doing, Grant?
Doing well, Tony. Thank you.
Today we're going to talk about internet reliability. Now, seemingly a boring subject, but when you start boiling it down, and we will, it gets down to what's your time worth. So when we talk about internet reliability, most people think of upload and download and Xfinity, 10x speed. Most
Brainwashed.
What's that? Brainwashed. Well, it's a marketer's way of distilling it down to, don't you want fast internet?
Yeah. Well, and that's the problem, though, right? It's not all about up and down. There's a lot of factors that come into play.
Right.
One of the things that we deal with on a regular basis is that the salesperson at the unnamed ISP calls up and says, "Hey, we can give you more bandwidth, and for just a little bit more money, right?" And so a client comes back to us and says, "Yeah, this is great. We're going to get all this extra bandwidth," and the reality is that they're not using the bandwidth that they have today. But that's the only way that the ISPs are able to continue to increase their bottom lines, is because they're not actually making the internet any faster. They're just allowing you to move more data at a given time. Now, don't get me wrong, there's use cases for that, right? But the actual makeup of performance really comes down to, obviously, bandwidth, latency, and jitter. And so bandwidth is think of it as the lanes of a freeway, right? Or lanes of your road. So the more lanes the more cars you can put on it.
Right.
Latency is how fast those cars are moving. So if you got really high latency, think of that as rush hour traffic. If you have low latency, that's like at midnight and you can go far past the speed limit, right? And then jitter is going to be based on the quality of those roads. So think of it as the difference of, like I said, like a highway with multiple lanes and it's been freshly paved, or you're driving on gravel, dirt rutted roads. And so the higher the jitter, the less quality, the more rutted of the roads you get. So when you add all these together, basically you're dealing with, it could be a massive freeway. So if you had a ton of bandwidth and low latency and low jitter, that's ideal, right? That is the best of your markings versus you find most ISPs are going to be kind of a balance in somewhere in between, right? That they're going to have maybe a lot of bandwidth, but their latency is going to be much higher. And then if their jitter is high as well, it doesn't really matter what you're trying to do, you're still going to have a hard time, doing things on the internet. So it's finding that balance between them all. And typically, if you're going to have a high bandwidth, low latency, low jitter internet connection, it's going to be really expensive, right? So the ISPs know exactly what I'm talking about here, and they're charging for it. So most internet connections that are used today are going to have that balance of all three of them to the best of what the ISP can deliver for a value price.
Well, and if we're talking about reliability, so there's even more we could go into in terms of how the internet works and how certain applications use bandwidth, that's not what this is about. This is about
different conversation, deeper dive. Yeah.
I want to, hit my head on my computer listening to you.
Yeah.
So we're talking about reliability, and reliability, if we had to, it's like, hey, it's always on. The old Bill Gates thing, computers, computing power will be like electricity. It's either on or it's off. You either have your laptop working in your home office or, your laptop shut and you're watching TV, but, you still need internet. So,
well, yeah, and just like you said, if you look at it from like a power or like a utilities perspective, power still goes out, right? And so does internet. In fact, internet providers they even write it into their contracts. The ones that will actually provide a service level agreement even say that they're going to run at 3 nines or 99.9%.
Right.
Most small business lines don't even have that. They're like, it's called best efforts, and they'll say, we will make sure that it's running as to our best of our efforts, which means that you're probably running at maybe 99%, maybe 98%. when you do the math on that, we're talking days of outages. And so when you think of days of outages over a period of a year, that's a really long time. And there's no specific time of when that's going to happen. It's going to happen maybe at nights, maybe during the day when it's the least convenient and you have a bunch of staff that are working that ultimately have to go home. You just don't know. And so it's a real flip of the coin.
Well, and it's interesting too, because depending on where you're located, you might have different, different levels of internet performance. Also, depending on the network you're on or the performance you get from that network, if more people are on the freeway, it slows things down. So we've all kind of experienced that. But the whole reliability thing is about, if the internet goes down, which these ISPs say it will occasionally, it could go down at the wrong time. And basically, we've all experienced this too. When you don't have access to internet, people are like, oh my gosh, like
they lose their mind.
They lose their minds.
Yeah, it's changed. I've been doing this for a long time, and it has changed over the years. Where it used to be like, oh, okay, internet's down, because a lot of things were still done on a server, and you can still get work done, right? Internet was, for research purposes, things like that. It wasn't as heavy. Like you might even have your email on a server in the closet, right? So you still could work. Nowadays, with almost everything being in the cloud, you lose internet. That's it. Like close your laptop lid, go home, and find something else to do, because you're not working, right? And so that's where you start seeing a large drain on the finance side of things.
Yeah, depending on your company and what you do and who you do it for, having access to the internet and having it be performing optimally is it could be a couple of hours outage. I mean, tens of thousands of dollars, thousands of dollars. The thing that I found was interesting, and I'll have you tell a story, because you have multiple stories that you've told me over the years here, but just having redundant internet or a redundant network, and I liken it to, so I live out here in Snohomish, Washington, and for those of you who don't know where this is, we're out in the trees. And so we have a generator that if the power goes out, which it does several times a year, especially during the winter months here in Washington, the generator kicks on. And literally we notice maybe it goes out for, has to be 10 seconds. And there's a switch, boom, it just switches over to the generator. It doesn't take long and everything's working great. And so that's kind of the redundant piece of it. And sometimes, depending on when it happens, we don't even know. Like I get a thing on my phone, the power went out, and we're like, the power went out? That tells me that investment for that generator was well worth it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so with internet, obviously, even a little blip, people notice. So that means that you're dropping a phone call, you're dropping a video conferencing call, something stops loading, and ultimately even that sometimes is too much of an impact. And so having some level of an intelligent routing device that is looking at each connection 10 times a second and says, oh, there was a failure, reroute all traffic down this service versus this one. It kind of goes back to the mentality of like, oh, I have a backup internet connection. And I'm like, okay, what that tells me is that a backup internet connection means that you're paying for a piece of internet or service that you're not utilizing until something happens.
Right.
And in an intelligent routing, which is also known as SD-WAN, now you're actually utilizing all services that you're paying for all the time. It just happens to be if you lose one, you don't notice it because the other ones have picked up the slack. And so you don't actually drop a phone call, you don't drop a conference call, and you just continue out throughout your day without even noticing it. And so none of your productivity drops. So
Right.
it's really, really powerful to have that type of technology.
So I think there was, I can't remember if it was a manufacturer or an engineering firm, but this was a few months ago, and you're like, oh yeah, so-and-so, they lost internet and and they installed this device that you guys install and configure. The thing that caught my eye was, oh, you have multiple internet service providers that you hook up, and now with the way that this intelligence works, is you can actually route certain services or access to the internet for certain things that you do in your business to one ISP versus another, and it's like you're optimally performing.
Yeah. So basically, you're the intelligent routing. You're actually routing based on service. And so I can give priority to certain types of traffic. So like video traffic, VoIP calls, things like that. I can say, no matter what's happening, I want these pieces of traffic to get there regardless of whatever else is happening on the network. So if, somebody's, on lunch break and they're streaming Netflix, I don't want that to take over my available bandwidth. I want my voice calls and my video conferencing calls to take priority. And then maybe Netflix loads, for the person that's got at lunch. So you're able to really control where traffic is going, what sort of priority it gets, and you're able to reduce traffic or reduce noise on the rest of your network from other types of systems that maybe you don't care so much about or don't have business case usage. So it's smart internet, right? You give, versus you just plug into the wall and internet is what it is. Now you actually have true control over what's happening past your firewall.
But this is the quintessence of an IT, what I would say good IT help. And that is, you have to know what business applications, what types of devices, where they're located. You have to know all of those things about a business. Then you also have to know how to work the technology to optimize it. And that's what you guys do at Succurri. And I would say, we could have multiple webinars on this, and you could go down the rabbit hole with some of this technology. But really, it's, if you're having issues with reliability in your internet, this is something you should have a conversation with Grant about, because there are some questions he's going to ask you, like, well, okay, tell me what applications you use, how many people, where are they located?
Well, one use case that comes out that most people don't think about, but I actually encountered it with bringing on a client here recently, was they basically are working with an ISP, not to be named, we all know who they are, and they always, they've been having issues forever. And they call up and say, hey, we're having issues. And the ISP says, we don't see any problems. We don't know what's going on. And that's the common response for just about every ISP, is it's not my fault. So by having this type of intelligent routing in here, we now get the metrics to say to the ISP, not only is it your fault, but here's where the problem is at. And so now we have tangible evidence to be able to hold our feet to the fire and actually get the problem solved. And this client was dealing with this for months, and where service would go out for 30 minutes, 15 minutes, 5 minutes daily. And so you can just imagine what sort of impact that has on somebody's business. And so being able to have that type of device and saying, hey, we will actually get your issue fixed, because now we have the information that the ISP cannot dispute.
Right.
And so that's a really, really powerful use case for it.
Well, hey, Grant, thank you so much for walking us through this. I think it's really important, especially if you want your business to run well and you need access to the internet, which is it's every business. So thank you for your time. And if anybody wants to give Succurri a call, Grant's more than happy to have those conversations. But I think this is a piece of information that you need to be aware of. Even if you don't do anything about it, You need to be aware that this is what causes all of it, and it's not just about uploads and downloads.
Your time will come.
Yeah.
It's not today. It's
Exactly.
Point. Yeah.
The internet will go out.
Yeah.
Well, excellent. I appreciate your time.